Hello, Ryan here, and welcome to Star Citizen Sunday. This is a weekly show which covers all of the news from the week just past. Be sure to subscribe if you like what you see, and let's get on with it. This week, Alpha 3.18 opens up to all backers on the PTU. The narrative team talks more about new missions and gangs, plus we hear the latest plans on server meshing and getting Pyro out to us all. So this week's Inside Star Citizen was a part 1 episode checking in with many of the developers gathered together for the summit to talk all about server meshing and the rollout plan for this final piece of core tech. Now, much of this episode was just checking in with the teams involved in the summit and what it all involved in itself and how important it was, but it also highlighted kind of the roadmap plan for getting Pyro, server meshing, and dynamic server meshing out the door to us all. With the objective of this summit to flesh out the exact steps and roadmap for server meshing based on the work that they have been doing and reflect back on how the rollout of persistent entity streaming went and learn and improve from that, as well as get everyone on the same page regarding what the plan is and how to achieve it. And thanks to these summits, they do say that they now have the critical path outlined to achieve all this, with the object of this first critical path being to get a second solar system into the PU as fast as possible, being the Pyro system. So they now have this roadmap on how to do it, and they are discussing the issues and problems that could arise, just trying to get ahead of the game there. But the first step is to separate the replication layer, which unlocks the stuff needed for the Pyro jump gates and server meshing, which will allow them to deliver Pyro and the technical backend for the jump gates. And this is one of the first big steps to then getting server meshing out the door. Now, they did say that to get to dynamic server meshing, which is the end goal, it is going to be an ongoing process for quite a while. But it is now full steam ahead to get it done, and they are finally in a position to get static server meshing in place. And if or when any issues pop up along the way, they now know that they can invent their way around these problems and get it done. So ultimately the plan has slightly changed, which now prioritizes getting Pyro out first, as they know that getting static server meshing will take a little more time, and they don't want to hold up this second star system any longer. And a friend of mine who has a lot more understanding of this stuff than I do said it does sound like they are slimming down 4.0 to get only what is needed for Pyro, which means the biggest downside of this is we won't be having the persistent universe with multiple servers per system, or shards, in 4.0, so we won't get that massive performance uplift that we were all hoping for. Although he does say there should still be some very good performance increases, but the plan now being separate the replication layer, then enable one server per system, and add Pyro for 4.0. Then they will add a fixed number of servers per system, which is actually static server meshing, then tackle dynamic server meshing, which is any number of servers per system dynamically changing based on what is required. So personally, I'm actually more happy with this news, and as much as I would like server meshing to be done as soon as possible, of course it means we can finally get the end game that we've all been waiting for, but if we can get that second star system with ultimately a light version of static server meshing, while they work on the full static and then eventually dynamic server meshing, then that is fine with me, as I will have plenty to do. And it could also mean that the potential of getting 4.0 out for the end of the year is greater than what it would have been if it was full static server meshing. Now, Jared did say that this was part 1 of this server meshing summit. Part 2 will come in the next few weeks, so it will be interesting to see how that goes. But that was Inside Star Citizen, an interesting episode that did bring a lot more light and very important information as to what the plan is to roll out 4.0, and if we can get Pyro by the end of the year, then that'll be fantastic. Anyway, let us move on. So this week's Star Citizen Live was speaking with members of the narrative team, and this team has certainly grown with many new faces, so always great to check in with who these people are and what their role is. Now, this episode wasn't full of new hype details, and many of the questions asked were repeats of questions that we've kind of had before, but as always, many new backers join the project on a daily basis. Welcome, by the way, if you are new to Star Citizen. So they won't know these answers, so for a few of the questions, I will cover them briefly. First one being, does narrative drive gameplay, or does gameplay drive narrative? Like, what comes first? Now, in essence, it is a bit of both, but ultimately, the majority does begin with narrative, as much of the lore for the verse was written 10 years ago when the project first started, and thus is quite heavily established. Although they do continue to iterate on it by either expanding it or alterating just to slightly fit, but also gameplay can kind of ask for some lore to fit whatever is the feature that they're working on, if it wasn't already there. Plus, many of the lore is written in a way that is quite open, meaning that they give the artists the freedom to create without being constricted by really specific lore pieces, so they can kind of do what they're good at. It is all more of a team collaboration, and oftentimes narrative or other teams can kick something off, then they will work together to iterate on it and make sure that it all fits. A prime example of this is the new salvage missions that are coming in with 3.19, how narrative had already set up the mission giver Geoff Zanelli, whose lore has been kind of worked on a while ago and will be getting more love and attention going forwards, so that they can not only expand on salvaging lore, but also on the mission givers. We also did hear a little bit more about what these missions will involve, and the idea is that the players are buying the rights to a ship that they can salvage, so you basically pay a little bit of cash, then you get access to that salvage, either lawfully or whatever. They also created a new salvaging organisation for 3.19 called Adagio, I think it was, who basically handle all the lawful contracts, while I think Clovis may handle one of the shadier ones, the open contract, and then there's a new outlaw group, I think was called Tar Pits, who are coming to handle the illegal mission, it seems. Now, TAR, T-A-R, stands for Tow and Rescue, and these are a gang who kind of use that name as a way of enticing and trapping people, thinking that you're coming to rescue them when they actually rip you off. Now, this isn't established in the game right now. They won't actually be ripping you off straight away, but eventually that's the plan. It was also mentioned that they are working on more than just 3 contract types, being the lawful, illegal, and open. So interesting to hear what other options are on the way, which have not been expressed yet. Now, in regards to the consistent Tuesday narrative posts, these have been released every Tuesday for practically as long as the project has been going, and for many of them, not all of them, but most, they will begin to come in to the verse by way of characters, stories, or whatever showing up for players to see, read, or discover. And much of it already is available to see. If you walk around the landing zones, you can see very much about what each company who own that landing zone is about, especially around places like Hurston. Anyway, next question is, how is the Galactopedia coming along? Now this, if you don't know, is the kind of in-lore encyclopedia that holds all the information about everything in the game, and will eventually be physically in the game as a place called the Ark, where players will be able to go and visit on location and go inside and read all about human history and Xi'an history, maybe not Banu history, but it is all available there, or even access it likely via posts on the Mobiglass. And I think it was said that players will eventually be able to listen to many of these posts as audiobooks while they're in their spaceship flying around, which will be amazing, especially when we start getting these long-haul cargo missions, or just when you're out mining, being able to listen to the Crimson Kid, or A Gift for Baba, or whatever the lore stories are, just having that on in the background will be such a nice way of embedding you into the game. Now, the next question is, how are the alien languages coming along? And if you are not aware, there are many alien species to be found throughout the verse, some friendly, some not so friendly, and others never seen before, but we know they exist. We have the Xi'an, the Banu, the Tavaran, the Vanduul, who are the main protagonists, and then of course the Cathak, who are kind of the other side of the Xi'an. They're warring with the Xi'an for centuries, but we've never seen them. The Xi'an don't tell us anything about them. Now, for the Banu and the Xi'an, CIG have released and developed a full language that players can learn, and they are always continuing to further develop these. The Vanduul language will also likely be probably the most heavily developed language, but due to lore of not having a friendly relationship with them, we don't know much about the language themselves. Obviously the developers do, the narrative team do, but in terms of players in the verse, we haven't had chance to talk to them properly to learn their language. Now, all the alien races are being created as deep species that go very, very deep, and allow players who have learnt things like the language or the culture to have maybe a little edge on a trade deal or exclusive opportunities because you understand what they're saying. And they will be developing the other languages like Ancient Tavaran, which I never even considered because we fought the Tavaran in 2 wars very early on in the timeline of Star Citizen, and so Of course, their language was somewhat lost because they have been incorporated into the UEE, but now with quite a large enclave of Taveran in the Branna system, they're coming back to prominence. So it sounds like they're having a bit of a cultural resurgence, and ancient Taveran is being developed for that very scenario, which would be very cool. Now, the next question is just basically Tessa Bannister, ? And there have been conversations on how to bring her back. She was a character, a voice, only a voice. We didn't know what she looked like, but she was giving out missions in the early days of the verse. And we all want her back. Nothing is concrete yet. As I say, they have been discussing her, but she will return one day, but they want to do her justice. Next question is to do with gangs, and they do say that they are looking to expand on other gangs in the Stanton system, as well as Pyro, of course, but in Stanton, alongside the Ninetails, there are the Dusters, who they say specialise in high-end theft, like raiding mining claims, and I believe they are now actively working on the Duster group and figuring them out. We did hear about the Tar Pits, as we know, who are the ones giving out missions for salvaging. There is also the Nova Riders, which I completely forgot about, and the Hurston Workers United, who are kind of trying to work for labour rights for their people, but they're being sort of painted as outlaws by Hurston. So a lot to develop there, a lot to dive into, but nice to see quite a lot of variety in terms of gangs. And it will be great when we start having actual places like hideouts on moons and planets where we could either go for jobs, building reputation, or fighting. Now, the next question is to do with Pyro. What is going on with Pyro? Like, what is this system, basically? And they say the benefit of Pyro coming in is how it will act as a lawless system, which is a stark contrast to the Stanton's system being a UEE claim system. So it really allows them to explore that side of the verse. Now, the star itself, the Pyro star, the sun, it does have these dangerous flares, which is why it was kind of left unclaimed and is a dangerous place to live in that regard, outside of the lawlessness. Now, these contrasts carry huge implications that will be great to explore how things in one system either carry over or don't carry over to the other. So a lot to process, but it does open up a lot more variety. And eventually in Pyro, we will see warring gangs and the remnants of these wars between the gangs as they fight for control. Next question is Pyro all bad? Why would a lawful player want to even go there? Now, for lawful players, Pyro suits kind of this new group that they're developing there called Survivors, or they're kind of like a neutral group who are not siding with the UEE, they're not siding with the gangs, they just want to exist, and they can provide jobs and will likely be found throughout the various systems, not just Pyro. They also have discussed the possibility of a potential org who operate in Pyro, who are there to try and establish order, likely fighting back against the other gangs there. But many lawless systems in the verse, when the star map is fully fleshed out, are going to need to be passed through to get to another system. So eventually, even if you have no plans to go to Pyro or settle in Pyro, you may have to travel through one day just to get to Nyx. So plenty of profit to be made in this place. Obviously, a lot of it will be based on your actions, where you go, or that will determine the potential dangers. But if you are a lawful player, that isn't to say that you won't be able to exist in Pyro full time. You might just need to be more on guard. Next question, will we be able to fight Xeno threat in the Pyro system? And they say yes, that is the hope. They are based in Pyro, so the chances are they will be there when we go through one day. Next question after that is to do with changing the lore of Pyro. Will we see any more changes to previous lore? And they say that as they continue to develop the game, the lore will evolve. And they do try to keep it as close to the original lore as possible, but changes will be necessary, and is more of a natural evolution of the game developing, and having that freedom to retcon as and when will make the game better and more fun. Now, Pyro, if you didn't know, was originally a very harsh system that would hold very little for players. And with the Planet Tech team capable of making very impressive landing zones, they can make these locations even better. Plus, when these systems were written up, they were done so way before the potential of even thinking about procedural planets. So they will just provide more planet-side gameplay, but that's not to say that the environment isn't going to be dangerous. Anyway, that about wraps up the Star Citizen Live episode. A nice chat with the team, and as I say, great to meet the new members. They have really started to grow that team, which is great to cover all the areas needed. Not a lot of new stuff learnt, but nice to hear their thoughts on many areas discussed. Now, Inside Star Citizen next week is talking about big mining changes, Jared says, which are coming in 3.19. So very excited to see what this will involve. But that was Star Citizen Live. Let us move on. So also this week, with Alpha 3.18 on the cusp of releasing to live, there was a new post highlighting the changes coming to salvaging and repair, just to help players understand ahead of release what the changes are and how they work. I highly suggest giving it a read. Definitely helps to prep for the release of 3.18 so that you're not having to learn it when it goes live. Now, this week's narrative portfolio post was talking about Clark Defense Systems, so if you want to learn more about this in-game company, do check the link below. And finally, Alpha 3.18 was pushed to all backers on the PTU, while they continue to work on getting the few remaining blockers resolved and out to the live servers. Now, they have been pumping out patches with tons of bug fixes, server crash fixes, and 30k crash fixes as well, plus bugs with the transit system, which is one of the blockers, so we cannot be too far off from a live release, and I think personally the potential for next week is very high, but of course it is anyone's guess at this point. So that brings us to the end of the show. If you do enjoy my content, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Also, I am able to do this thanks to my very generous patrons and channel members. If you appreciate what I do and would like to help make it even better from as little as $1 a month, all of the links are provided below.